Hi, everybody. Good morning. Really great to see you all. This is the first time I've been speaking to a crowd that is not Fortune 1000, who are our primary funders. I run an organization called Out and Equal. And today, I really love going after your 5 points, Sam, because in addition to number one, I think we convene the largest conference event for LGBTQ people. 60% are LGBTQ identified, and about 30% are ally identified. People working in HR, working in talent in general, working as allies, working in other employee resource groups. So I hope that by the end of the 20 minutes or so, some of what I have to share with my own personal story and how I've led our organization, not just through COVID, but through some interesting dynamics I'll get into in a minute. It actually speaks to a lot of these 5 points. So why me today? We'll talk about that. Why this topic now? It sounds like we're all kind of on the same page that even if we don't know our way through it, we need to be talking about it and figuring it out. And then why and how you, yes you, not just to our community, but in broader ways of allyship. Just a little bit about the organization I run. It is called Out and Equal, and we were founded 25 years ago when my predecessor, I followed a founder and took over about 4.5 years ago, was kicked out of seminary when she came out as a lesbian. She had been studying for a few years, and then looked around and saw that only about 4% of Fortune 500 companies had any protections for LGBTQ workers. And so she started her organization. And as I said, we grew to convene the largest conference. We are, every October, about 5,000 people, and we travel cities. So we've been doing this event for a very long time. And we've evolved from supporting to one of like a leadership challenge, right? So the more people that are at the table, the more we're focused on helping people thrive in however they are out. And this is our mission. We believe we want to achieve a global workplace equality where everyone feels like they belong. And belonging is a word you all have heard a lot about, I'm sure, and we have been talking about it for a few years. So let me tell you, we're going to talk a little bit about my story, the story of our organization. It's definitely going to also include what we've been seeing through our events as well. I am a single mom. I am the mother of biracial daughters. I had them when I was living and working in the Middle East. I was moved over there by Booz Allen doing some management consulting, and their father is Egyptian. I'm going to skip over third because I want to end with that one on this slide. I have a household that includes aging parents. I am cisgender. I use she, her pronouns. I am spiritual and an active member of the Unitarian Church. I am also a CEO. I have a background in change management, organizational development, and business strategy, and I've lived in or worked on 4 continents. I was gone for the entire 8 years of the Obama administration. I missed watching marriage equality happen. I was watching it from the television, so I have been living and working actually overseas in very diverse environments. The reason why I left my sexual orientation till last is because the story for me was that I actually came out, I think the same year Ellen did, and it kind of hit the mainstream media. I started dating women, and when I came out at Booz Allen, and diversity was kind of already the name of the game, that a lot of people, if they didn't kind of even believe in it, they knew they had to congratulate me publicly. And so I first came out as a lesbian because I was dating women, and then Booz Allen actually sent me to Out and Equal. I was in my early 20s. I went to this conference when it was only 200 people, and I snuck down the hall to the one workshop on bisexuality. And I lied to my gay male colleagues that I was with because I didn't think that they would accept me as bi, and in fact, they didn't. So I snuck in. I actually met other people that were bi-identified. I found the language to sort of come out and come back. And what I call, I use the language stand up for the integrity of inclusion, because I had people in our community who were saying, you're not really bi, or you just haven't decided yet, or kind of invalidating my story. I'm not gay enough. I wasn't a lesbian enough. And this not enough thing stuck in me and shut me down. It shut me down from talking about my sexuality with some groups, but in others, especially when I was out at work, I would start talking about that we really needed to be more inclusive even within our own community. So that was 20 years ago, and I was a young participant at our conference. Meanwhile, fast forward 20 years later, and I had joined the board of Out and Equal before I moved to the Middle East, but because it's the Middle East, I left the board because I happen to live in a country that still has capital punishment on the books for being out. And so I felt like I needed to go back in the closet. When I came back to the country in 2016, right before Trump was elected, with my 2 kids, I got connected to Out and Equal. They were looking for a new CEO. And this is the leadership landscape I walked into. Rapidly evolving LGBTQ community demographics. Some people say, that alphabet soup, LGBTQ, blah, 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 right? You hear that a lot with all the letters in our community, and I kind of smile at that because there are a lot of letters. We had watched, again, marriage equality had happened. There was a lot of progress towards workplace equality. Then 2 months after I started, Parkland happened. And the shooting and sort of the floodgates opening around CEO, C-suite, largely corporate advocacy, and in some cases activism, was something that was showing up in articles in HBR. People were studying this. What are companies doing? They used to be silent, and now American Airlines is telling us they're not going to fly children away from the border when they've been taken away from their families, right? Companies were beginning to stand up, and so we were studying this, and because we support the people within companies who are doing DEI work, we began to be with them on this journey of how they wanted to use their voice to impact change around them in ways that they had never done before. Obviously, there were other shifts in culture and politics. And what I was noticing back then was that, and what we began to speak about when I was on stages in 2018 in this environment, was that we were seeing the journey wanting and needing to go from diversity, which is just butts and seats, who can we get in, to inclusion, where companies were beginning to spend more money on DEI work. They were beginning to fund what we call employee resource groups, not just LGBTQ, but women, people of color, disability, veterans, et cetera. And we started talking about this idea of belonging. I wasn't the first one to do it, but we were pretty early on because I'm a huge fan of Brené Brown. Some of you might be as well. And so we started to think about, well, what if people get 100 on the Corporate Equality Index score, which is the index for our community, but people are still afraid to come out? What is that about? What is that about? It's workplaces where people feel like they can belong. And it had reminded me, actually, moving into our biggest event in 2018, I had lived and worked in West Africa for a wonderful nonprofit called the International Women's Media Foundation. We were supporting women journalists, and I began to learn about Ubuntu philosophy and culture, and the greeting in some of the tribes in South Africa in particular is this. When you meet somebody on the street, you say to them, Sawabona. Sawabona means, I see you. And the person answering you says, Sakona. What Sakona means is, because you see me, I exist. And this philosophy of interdependence is one that I had carried through with me in my work, because it wasn't just West Africa. I lived again in the Middle East. And there was all these references to the way that are a little bit different than the individualistic way we do them in the US sometimes. But I was carrying this with me. And this was a call that in 2018, at my first big event presiding, where I actually called out to different members of our community, not just LGBTQ, but allies, and address people individually. I see you. If you are gay or lesbian pioneers, if you are transgender, if you are young, if you are old, I see you, we see you, and you exist, and you belong with Out and Equal. So why this topic now, right? So that was our journey up until then. And we went into our first big event. We call it the Workplace Summit. There was 5,000 people. And because we had 30% of the people who were ally identified, I was suspecting in this environment that we were all living in that there was more to just kind of talking at people or with people about coming out of the gay closet. That people, we were living in a time that certainly has continued to strengthen around people wanting to be out with things that were important to them. So here's what we did, and I at the time said to myself, I'm either going to lose my job or this is going to work really well. And thank God it was the latter, because this is something now we repeat every year. We have done it in multiple countries in different languages, and we call it the snowflake. Yes?
Ally. What 30% is ally? What does that mean?
Oh, ally would be someone who, with our community, supports LGBTQ people but is not LGBTQ identified. But we'll talk about how ally is evolving, but thanks for that, Sam. So here's what we did. There was paper snowflakes on the table. We asked people to write down what is something you are hiding at work that is negatively impacting your performance or your relationship with colleagues. And remember, even though we had a third ally in the room, it's 66% LGBTQ identified, right? I was not sure what we were gonna get. We had everybody crumple up these snowflakes. We put on Disney Let It Go for 60 seconds. We had a huge paper snowball fight, which anybody who loves to do mass participation completely anonymized this data, and everybody was safe because we picked up the snowflakes, we threw them, we hit them, you know, and then at the end of that 60 seconds, we asked people to gather up whatever snowflakes were around and to sit down and open them up and read with your table what you saw on them. After that, we had everybody not everybody decided to, but about 2,000 snowflakes up on stage. And I wasn't sure what we were gonna get. Here's what we got. Number one theme on these were some version of the imposter syndrome. I am not good enough to be here. Someone will find me out, I will be replaced. I am lonely, I am depressed or anxious. My friends and family don't really know me. I'm dealing with addiction, I'm taking care of children or parents who are sick or with disabilities or are aging. I was very poor growing up and have been homeless. And these are all, by the way, all members at this event were representatives sent by Fortune 500, 1,000, largely speaking. I can't now afford my rent or expenses. I'm living on the edge. I drive to work in a way that takes twice as long to avoid hitting the radar screen of police who may pull me over. I dislike my spouse. We haven't had sex in 5 years. I'm a bad parent, I'm suicidal, I don't want to go on. The last one, my staff brought up to the woman who was facilitating this on stage, and we called out to this person and said, we see you, we don't know who you are, and everybody in the room got up and was crying and was clapping, and we didn't know for who, but essentially we were clapping for all of us because everybody's hearts were right there on those snowflakes, and this was not what you're hiding at home. This is what people were hiding at work that they wish they could somehow share with one other person to feel less lonely. And unfortunately, after this event, I had 4 people come up to me and said, I was the one who wrote that. So here's how this changed us. It completely changed our strategy and how we did events that were not just kind of tolerating or being sheepish about the emotional part of events. We actually used this idea of emotional, authentic connection to design the entire event experience, and we did it in COVID as well. I'm not going to read through all of these, but we had a belonging booth where people could go in and record stories about who they were and what they were bringing in with them, what made them unique. We've done Snowflake again in many countries and many languages. It doesn't matter what the culture is. The themes on the snowflakes are the same around the world. We have kind of addressed the holistic nature of people. We have 12-step meetings. We have silent discos for people who don't want to be, in the noise or who are introverted. We have creative art spaces. Many of you are probably doing these things. And we continue to do identity-focused closed-door sessions where people can find their people. And this cuts across, this is not just LGBTQ, but we have different identities because we all are wearing multiple. And we have closed-door sessions so people can feel like they're with their people. And then we have open-door sessions where some people then make themselves available to answer questions, right? Not everybody wants to represent their whole group and use their time bonding to educate other people about their identity, but we certainly provide that space. So again, this changed everything for us, everything we're doing now with this event, besides the 130 workshops we do about every year on 17 different learning tracks, centers in on that human connection. So what I'm bringing to you today, and I love this group because I don't feel like I'm talking at you or informing you as much as this being a dialogue. I know we're going to do some questions, but really the question here for all of us, I think, not just one I'm posing to you, but one I think about all the time as we move forward is, what is this new landscape we're all walking into? And Sam teed it up in the first 5 points. There's a lot of talk right now about trauma-informed leadership because of what we've been through with COVID. I think not just dealing with the health stuff around COVID, but around the loneliness and isolation that certain groups in particular have felt more than others. We've got this monumental shift towards the workplace of the future. I think we all hear that a lot with the millennials, Gen Z. Ongoing conversations that need to get better around racial justice and equity. Ongoing political dynamics and backlash. We're in election season now and will continue to be, so I'm sure all of us are excited for that and what we're going to be witnessing there. It's getting already pretty intense. We've got still, with my community, the rapid evolution of LGBTQ and other identities, and it's a diversification within our community and as part of the general population. There's Gallup poll data from last year that indicates that around 50% of Gen Z kids are identifying as LGBTQ or not straight, right? So there's two things there. There's the label that people want to be identified with, and there's people who don't want to be labeled. Young kids who want more flexibility around fluidity and want to be able to go through their journeys. And then, of course, I don't need to tell you, we've got changing customer and client demands and economic pressure. And then there's the challenge of bandwidth of how we can get our messages out about who we are and what we do when everybody is inundated all the time. So we call this way forward. It's our trademark now. We talk about the business of belonging is like taking the squishy concept that everybody's talking about, but making it real. And the making it real part is not easy. It's very tedious sometimes, and it takes a long time, right? It's a big arc. But it is a business. We need to treat it like that, and that's the way we're going to make movement happen. And now this comes to not just you, but to all of us. If this community that I represent and what I'm up here talking about is something you hear a lot about in the news, or many of you may have friends and loved ones who identify as LGBTQ, certainly a lot more young people identifying that way means that people who never thought of themselves as allies are now, Googling, calling me up at my kids' school and saying, pronouns, what are we doing here? So I think my message is not to preach about X, Y, and Z step you can take, but it really first starts with getting grounded in this really wild landscape we're living in with inclusion and this big idea about belonging. How you can get grounded and how you show up. And these are just things to think about. To situate this in context, for many of you, this is not news. We've got, our beloved Brené Brown out there really resonating with the public. We've got politicians speaking about their lives and experiences. In this case, the CFO of Citibank, coming out in a blog about his experience. But also, we have business schools teaching vulnerability. And for any of you who've gone to business school or studied kind of like the business crowd, what they say about success and key to success for MBAs and people in business, but I think this is for everybody really, is about self-awareness, right? It's about how, especially in this wild environment when people are projecting onto you or have biases against you, your personal agency and ability to get things done requires self-awareness. Some people who are not in the dominant group, people who come from minority communities, underrepresented communities, have had to think about this a lot more than dominant groups. And I think moving forward, being grounded in how you are feeling about your own experience and your own journey will make this real to you, so that it's not them out there and I'm doing them a favor. It's seeing yourself and your journey in this wider context. Oh, whoops, sorry, I'll go back. The other thing, as I referenced before, related to to what we're facing with some of this talk about trauma-informed leadership. What really sparked my attention was the former Surgeon General talking about the loneliness as the #1 health epidemic that we're facing because of the interrelated health issues. And I don't know about you all, but coming out of 2.5 years of what we're going through, I think we have already bumped into this, probably ourselves as well. But what we know from in our community, we're not experts on it, but we do have a bit of history in this, is what it feels like to be out of the closet in our community, using that language, but being able to be authentic and be yourself. That you can actually not have to worry about kind of explaining or changing the pronouns or the photo on your desk. And the bottom line is there's a lot of research out here in the diversity world that says that people, if you have a workforce that can be out and authentic as themselves, that you will have better business, you will have better results. And certainly, as Sam alluded to, the younger generations are demanding this. You know, I think there are big blurred lines now between what we used to call, not too long ago, I have my home life, I have my work life, and I have my personal life. And this is completely blended, and you have a younger workforce coming in actually feeling like they want the workforce, their employers, to meet more of their personal needs. But loneliness certainly is something in isolation that we have our eye on. So Sam had asked me, and I didn't pay him to do that, by the way, but allyship is, I wanted to put a definition in here. It has two parts that feel distinctly different to me. And one, I think, for people from a position of privilege and power probably feels a bit harder, and the other one, to me, doesn't feel as hard. And whichever one of these speak to you, I encourage you to really take it on. Allyship is, in this first one, an active, consistent, and arduous practice. Sounds fun, doesn't it? But it is, and it needs to be, because otherwise things won't change. It's an arduous process of unlearning and reevaluating, in which the person in a position of privilege and power seeks to operate in solidarity with a marginalized group. Now that might feel like, oh, it feels heavy. Yes, it's work, right? The second one I want to call up, I hope also speaks to this idea that allyship is not only if you come from a more dominant group in any of the identities, that you are reaching down or doing another group a favor or supporting them, right? There's still this idea of there's me and there's them, and there's this separation. There is, by pulling on our own experiences and how we've navigated our own journeys when we're not in the dominant group, and everybody here, no matter who you may look like on the outside, we have different life experiences, and there is an exercise and ways we build the ability to stand up for people in ways that we would want them to do for us. And it's based on trust, consistency, and accountability with others. So I ask everybody to think about this word and this practice of allyship. Certainly, are there ways we can boost people's presentation around the table? Are there people that sometimes we worry about having perfect language or being too personal? But I love the simple question of, oh, I noticed you changed your pronouns. How's that going for you, right? Or tell me about that. Sometimes we put so much pressure on ourselves to have perfect language, and all of a sudden you'd say, oh my God, I just made it about me. It's not about us in this moment when we have the ability to reach out and ask other people about their stories. And speaking of pronouns, this is not only because I represent an LGBTQ organization. There's a lot of text on here, so you can go, we have a tool on the internet, you can download this and look at it. I'm gonna reference it, but I don't expect you to read it. It is also the first day of LGBTQ Pride Month, and so I wanted to give you a concrete learning here and some insight. I'm happy to answer questions about it. And it's an active allyship we can all use, and you will, if you haven't bumped into this with young people, you'll bump into it more, and that is pronouns. The reason why you are beginning to see people referring to their pronouns, claiming pronouns, and acting as allies for others by saying our pronouns is because we cannot assume people's gender anymore. And this is not just for transgender or non-binary communities. It is because of the ways that, for example, women in the past may have been forced to, through dress code at work, worn a dress, worn their hair a certain way, worn jewelry and makeup. And some people don't fit the gender mold and have a gender story that doesn't necessarily mean what it looks like, on the outside. And so pronouns are a way, when I say I'm Erin, I use she, her pronouns, it is I am offering a bridge to others and respecting what they may be going through in their gender journey. And it's not about me, it's an act of allyship. And it is about what I want for my children and my children's friends and everybody who has really struggled with gender. And if you are, and if you haven't thought about it, I would encourage you to do so. Everybody has a gender story. So even if you don't know a trans person or you don't understand non-binary identity, all of us have a gender story. We have been either promoted because of it or restricted because of it or somewhere in between, right? We've watched our parents play gender roles. We've watched kids play gender roles. And no matter where you are on the issue, and in understanding this identity, pronouns are in the workplace. It's a way that we, again, can connect with people, and it shows people that you're an ally. So that was one specific little tidbit that I wanted to share today. More and more people, the data is out there again, that more and more people are comfortable, the younger people especially, with the idea and the practice of pronouns. Inclusivity improves business and inclusion pronoun practices are key. The data is really showing this, that as Sam alluded to, these are practices in the water that our young people are swimming in, and they expect their employers and events that they show up at, if they don't already, it's coming. And so becoming more familiar with that, I think, is a good and important practice for business. I like to include this one at the end because it kind of puts into focus, I think there's probably a cartoon that also could cut across many different identities, but I choose this one and I really love it. How do you address a serviceman who used to be a servicewoman? Thank you for your service. That is how, that really puts the focus on it, right? Of like what's important. And then for anybody who's an Ellen fan, I mean, it is Gay Pride Month, and so I'd like to end with Ellen. But for anybody who was a fan, she signed off the air this week after 19 years. And in her social, I didn't see the whole thing, but she ended her show with what I thought was just so beautifully and simply stated. If someone is brave enough to tell you who they are, be brave enough to support them. Coming out in any way LGBTQ or from diversity on the gender spectrum is not easy. People are getting beat up and killed for this. So we have especially trans women of color are at extremely high rates of murder in this country. And so this is not a trend, and if people are brave enough to do that, it is an act of allyship to at least just listen, and you don't even have to understand it, which is what Ellen says. They're showing you who they are, and that is the biggest gift anybody can ever give you. It's also, I think, and I'll end on that, the gift that we would all want for ourselves is for somebody just to say, tell me about your story, or how did that happen for you, right? It just allows us to have that bridge. And so thank you all for having me here and for listening, and I hope that I gave some interesting information and insight. I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you. That was excellent. Certainly a lot for all of us to think about. I know I've had the pleasure of having two 15-minute Zoom calls with Erin that each lasted almost an hour. So we could have her on stage the entire morning, but we won't, because you have two kids that have to get to school, right?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. So I'm going to ask the one question, and then we're going to need to move on to self-introductions. You mentioned on one of our calls that, and I won't mention the name unless you want to, that a very big shot, when they were under a business CEO, when they were under pressure, I believe asked you to come to their office, and behind closed doors was asking, what do I do? And something that's interesting for all of us, especially very, very large global events, are known now as brands. I mean, just like this individual. So I think I'll tell you where I want you to go. You said that if you can't win either way because of what's going on, the advice you gave this person.
Well, I'm not sure it's even advice that was personal advice for this person. And I do get calls from CEOs and C-suite executives who confidentially ask us, because we don't rate people, we don't call them out. Companies, we really meet people where they're at on their journey and help them figure out how to move forward. I think the question, Sam, really is, what is the younger workforce demanding? And not even just younger. The workforce in general is not letting people get away anymore with not saying anything. I mean, this is the dynamic we're all living in right now. And so I think the real question is, how are you going to navigate this? We actually don't tell people how to do this journey, because they have huge PR machines working for them that are looking at how things land in the public, and you've got your lawyers and you've got your government relations officers, and you have these employee resource groups that companies have invested in for 20 years now as employee engagement mechanisms, telling them they have a voice, that they have power. And this is really the kind of workforce we're all living in now, right? So what we tell people is to get all the right people in the room. And Sam, like you said, it was that #1 column in one of your slides. People, it's not just employees, it's customers as well, are expecting companies to act in ways that align with their values, period. And so I do think this is almost a soul-searching journey for everybody, and at the very highest levels of corporate America and of global multinationals, is like, wow, if we can't not say anything, what are we going to do? What are we going to say? And I think some of the kind of mishaps and things you've seen play out in the media in the last few weeks, the conversations that inevitably happen behind closed doors, are a recentering on what the company believes in, what the values are.